Hi everyone, Caitlin with Flux here. Thanks so much for joining me today in our training on the Grantee and Reviewer portal. This training is an overview on creating, modifying, and updating your organization's Grantee and Reviewer portal. We'll be going over a lot of material today, so please be aware that this might take up the whole half hour for the overview, and then the Q&A will follow afterward. If you should have any questions at any time during the webinar, please go ahead and type them in the questions section. We'll be dedicating the last part of the webinar for questions and answers, so we'll be saving all of the questions for then. If we don't get to your question in time, we'll make sure to curate those and answer them offline in an extended Q&A. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. In this Grantee and Reviewer portal overview, we'll be answering the following questions. On how to set up your portal pages, we'll go over how to create and modify the home page for grantees and reviewers, how to add additional pages of content, and how to filter and modify the cards that grantees will see on their dashboards. On the grantee and reviewers' roles and profiles in Flux, we'll make sure to answer the following questions. How are grantees and reviewers' roles and profiles set up on a user card? How do I give grantee and reviewer edit rights in the workflow? And how are grantees and reviewers' profiles and roles set up in the admin panel? Lastly, on modifying the review card, we'll go over how rating fields, comment fields, and instructions can be set up on the reviews card. And as I'd said earlier, there will be a Q&A following the overview. Now, before we get started with the first question, let's go over the difference between the way you and your internal employees interact with Flux versus the one that your grantees and reviewers do. The dashboards, cards, and interaction with these key features of Flux differ greatly for them, and you are able to control what they have access to and how they access their records on Flux. So first, let's go ahead and go over how to create the very first page your grantees and reviewers will see. The first step to creating your grantee and reviewers portals is by creating home pages for them. You can do this by going into the admin panel, then you're going to want to make sure you're in Forms. And home pages or any pages of additional content can be built under the generic templates model type. And that's going to be this blue icon right here. Here, you can build the home pages and other pages of content, as I said, for your grantees and reviewers. So let's take a look at this example of a grantee homepage. This is the preview mode of the welcome page for our grantees. Notice that you can format and brand text however you'd like here. You can also introduce them to the cards they will be interacting with, and you can describe the cards that they will see on the left side of the screen and what each card represents. So let's take a look into the builder mode. A generic template page is different from other model types in the builder. It's more like a web page rather than a form. Firstly, you are limited in the number of components you can add to your form. Secondly, there are no options for fields. Most of the home page will consist of text, images, and a component or two. This page you see here is meant to provide instructions for your users on how to use Flux to manage their applications, active grants, and more. Also in the generic templates section, you can create additional pages of content other than the home page. Let's say that you have multiple grant types, and each grant has detailed requirements, download links, and restrictions. You could create a separate generic template page or grantee page for each application type if you'd like. You can do so by clicking on New Template, naming it, and you can either create a new one from scratch or copy an existing theme if you have one. Now, let me show you an example of a template created for additional information. You can design the page however you'd like and provide additional links, such as for standardized budget forms or a documentation requirement, or any associated directions. Now, I'd like to go ahead and talk about how to actually set up the cards your grantees will see and interact with on their dashboards. You will be setting up the Grantee Dashboard as its own dashboard with filtered cards that you share with your grantees. For instance, you may want to set up your Grantee Dashboard with the following cards: New Request, Submitted Requests, Granted, and New Report and Approved Reports. This all depends on what your organization needs for your grantees. Each card will require a different set of filters. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of a Grantee Dashboard and how one of these cards has been filtered. So let's take a look at this Pending Requests card and see how it's been filtered. On this card, we only want our grantees to see their own pending requests. We can set this up by applying conditional logic on this grant request card. As you can see, we've applied the conditions program organization is equal to my org and the state of the request is equal to draft. This filtered card is one of 3 grant request themes in the portal, the other 2 being requests to edit, or in other words, any requests that have been sent back to the grantee, submitted requests, and other grant cards. All of these cards that you see here have filters on them, so their grantees can easily navigate through their own requests. Now you can also do this for your reviewers, as I'll show you here on this example dashboard. Reviewers have a much less complicated setup, as you can see. The way they will be interacting with Flux differs from your grantees, but is similar in terms of pre-filtering cards for their use and the portal they interact with. The example here is the home page, as you can see to the left, and the reviews card. You can filter the reviews card to fit their needs as a reviewer, such as only showing the grant requests that they need to view. Now let's see how these filtered cards function in the portal. Let's take a look at a grantee portal. As you can see, this looks very different from your own dashboard. The cards that we configured on the dashboard are located here to the left. And as you can see, the home page is the first page you'll see upon logging in. Now let me show you a reviewer portal. As you can see, the portal appears to be the same, where the cards are over to the left, but these are different cards specific to our reviewers. Now, let's take a look at how the grantees and reviewers themselves are set up on your site to make sure that they have the correct permissions to view dashboards. Grantees and reviewers must be recognized in our system as such, so that they can access their respective portals. There are 3 things you must set up for your grantees and reviewers: their profiles, their programs, and their roles, respectively. You'll set this up on their user card. So let me show you an example. Let's look at a grantee first. In order for a grantee to access his or her portal, he or she will have to have the appropriate profile. Here, the profile is going to be grantee. Otherwise, your grantee will not have access to his or her records. So let's click Edit. And you can see in the Edit view of this user card, you can assign the profile of the user. Here, Mike's profile is grantee. Now, let's go ahead and check out Mike's roles. Here, we can add or delete roles given to Mike. To give Mike a role, you can click on Add Role, and a modal will pop up to choose the role and program we wish to associate to Mike. Roles can range from a reviewer to a board member. Roles are interconnected with the workflow. For instance, a grantee will not be able to push a form through to the next stage without having an allowed role at that step, and a reviewer will not be able to review unless he or she has the allowed role at that state in the workflow. I'll talk more about this in a bit. For now, let's look at this modal. We want Mike to be a grantee. Now let's look at the program. The program will pertain to whichever program the grantee had applied to. So let's say that you might have programs ranging from arts and culture to entrepreneurship. Your grantee must be assigned to the appropriate program in order to interact with the appropriate records. This is set up similarly for reviewers. So let's take a look at a reviewer's user card. Again, you'll have to assign the correct profile, here it's reviewer, and the program and role. So I mentioned earlier the importance of the workflow. Let me go ahead and show you an example of what I mean. So let's go into the admin panel. And let's click on workflow. And let's look at the workflow for the grant theme of the grant request model type. So here's an example of a workflow for a grant request. These are the states that you can see here, these long bars. And these are the buttons, or transitions. So let's look at the allowed roles on the Submit button on this first state. Notice over to the right, under the Attributes, a section for allowed roles. Grantees and program associates are the allowed roles here. What this means is that only grantees and program associates are allowed to see and interact with this button at this state in the workflow. Note that internal users with administrator rights are the only users that can see all of the buttons, as you can see, all of these buttons, at any state in the workflow. Everyone else will have to have an allowed role. So here, you can also create buttons for when you'd like your reviewer to interact with the record. For instance, let's look at Review Complete. Here we can see that Review Complete has the allowed roles of Program Associate and Reviewer. This means that both users with either the Program Associate role or the Reviewer role can see and click this button and move the form to the next state. Now let's talk about how your grantee and reviewer's profiles and roles are set up in the admin panel. So let's go into User Settings, and let's check out the grantee profile. Here, you can configure which portal your grantees will see, and in this case, you can see that they are going to be interacting with the external portal, among other things, and also their rights. The rights configured here pertain to the ability to edit, add, delete, and manage things like documents, requests, or bank accounts that belong to them. You can do the same with the reviewer profile, as you can see here. Now let's look at roles. Here, you can give your grantees and reviewers a rollable type. What this means is that we provide roles according to program, subprogram, initiative, or a sub-initiative. So let's look at grantee. So here we have the name of the role as grantee, and the rollable type is program, not subprogram, nor initiative, nor sub-initiative. Lastly, let's talk about modifying the reviews card. Reviews cards are very simple. Usually, a bare bones reviews card has a field for ratings, a text area for comments, and a text field for instructions. So let's take a look at an example in the form builder. I'm going to be looking for the request reviews card. So here's an example of a review card. We're looking at the preview mode right now. Let's dive into the builder mode, where I'd like to direct your attention to a numeric field. You can set up your review card however you'd like, but of utmost importance is granting your reviewers the ability to make their ratings and comments. For ratings, we recommend a numeric field. This is usually a select field and can have either radio buttons or a drop-down menu. Either way, you can set the numeric values on whatever range you'd like. So let's take a look at a drop-down rating field. Here, the numeric range is set from 0 to 5. As you can see here, the starting value and the ending value. Under type, down here, we can select what type of select field it is, either a drop-down or radio. And what radio will do, it will allow for a user to select one of any of the choices. You can also add the comments section. So right below this field is another field for comments. And so this will be a text field that shows up on the page, as you can see here. You can also add instructions on this page in the same manner as you did for your grantee and reviewer homepage templates. You'll simply add a text field with any additional information you'd like your reviewer to take note of in the process of submitting their reviews. So any of these are text fields, and they can be instructions if you'd like. So it looks like we made really good time today, and that includes today's webinar on the Grantee and Reviewer portal. I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any features I did not cover extensively, we'll make sure to be hosting trainings in the future to address these features. You may also learn about any of these features by visiting our knowledge base. So now let's go ahead and open it up to questions. We've got a couple here. Why wouldn't I make the role for my reviewers all programs? And that's a good question. As you can see, the grantee and reviewer that I had set up had all programs associated with them. But let's say that you have a certain reviewer who is an expert in the visual arts, and you would only want them working on grant requests in your organization's visual arts program. You can limit the reviewer to the visual arts program, and it can reduce confusion on which requests to send their way, or on which requests a particular reviewer should be working on. So again, you can find that here in the roles, and you can add the role here as the reviewer, and the program as arts and culture. You can also always delete roles by clicking on this delete link, and you'll always get a warning before you delete the role. Got one more. Okay, so how do I know which allowed roles to put on buttons in my workflow? Think of your workflow as a collection of states, and the buttons are transitions from one state to the next. So let's look at the workflow again. So here's your collection of states, and these buttons, consider them transitions. They allow your workflow to move along and can be interacted with by only those with the allowed roles or internal users with administrator privileges, as I've mentioned. So notice that the Submit button will send the workflow from draft to new. So it'll send it to this state. So clearly labeling the states of your workflow will allow you to better recognize which states only your grantees will interact with, only your reviewers, or your program officers or associates. So as you saw before, the program associate was selected for a lot of these buttons. And that could be because they should have the same rights as an administrator, but not across the board. You only want the program associate to have rights to all of these buttons, but that's it. So you can do that by allowing them on the state. We have one more question. What's the difference between profile and role? So that's a really good question. The profile of a user will indicate the general way that the user is going to go ahead and interact with the site. So this includes which portal they will enter, such as the external portal that we saw here, or their rights. So for example, if you want your users to upload documents to records or edit their own records, you can configure that based on their profile. The role is what you will assign to your user, and that indicates how the user fits into the workflow of your forms. So this will allow the user to access records at whichever state you would like them to, and can also allow them to edit the record at that time. Okay, looks like we're out of questions. So in conclusion, today we went over how to create, modify, and update the portal pages for grantees and reviewers. We went over how to set up the profiles and roles for your grantees and reviewers, and how to modify the reviews card. To learn more and access the video recording of this webinar, please visit our knowledge base at flux.io/knowledge. There you'll be able to find a list of our upcoming webinars, links to register for any future webinars, and find the recordings of past webinars under a folder titled Training Webinars. Or feel free to ask us at support and we'd be happy to help you. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to host you again at our next training. Have a great day.